There comes a moment when silence becomes expensive, when the hours you surrender never return, when effort disguises drift. Listen carefully. What follows is not comfort, it is recognition. And recognition, once felt, cannot be undone. You were taught that progress announces itself loudly, that change comes with fireworks, that transformation requires witnesses. That belief has cost you more than you realize. The most powerful shifts in a human life occur without applause. They occur quietly, internally, often while the world assumes nothing is happening at all. And that is precisely why most people never experience them. You feel it, don't you? A subtle unrest, not failure, something worse. Stagnation disguised as motion. You wake, you work, you push, you sleep, and yet something remains untouched. There is a reason this pattern feels normal, and that reason is dangerous. Most people believe exhaustion equals effort, and effort equals progress. This belief is comforting. It allows you to stay busy without becoming accountable. But the mind does not reward motion. It rewards direction. Without direction, effort becomes a sedative. It soothes anxiety without changing outcomes. You call this doing your best, but your nervous system knows the truth. There is a quiet moment, usually late at night, when the noise fades. In that moment, a question surfaces uninvited. Is this all I am becoming? You do not ask it aloud. You bury it under routine. You drown it in distraction. You promise yourself tomorrow will be different. That promise is rarely kept, not because you are weak, but because you have been trained to betray yourself politely. Drifting is not laziness. It is the absence of decision, and drifting is the most common condition of adulthood. You were never taught that indecision is a force that shapes income, relationships, confidence, and self-respect. A force that slowly convinces intelligent people to accept lives they once feared. The tragedy is not that people fail. It is that they never confront what is quietly deciding for them. Look carefully at your own behavior. You wait for motivation before acting. You wait for clarity before committing. You wait for permission before claiming authority over your own direction. Waiting feels responsible. It feels safe. It is neither. Every day you delay defining what you want. Your mind defines it for you by default. And default settings are designed for survival, not significance. There is a hidden contract you have unknowingly signed. It states that comfort will be preserved at the expense of potential, that certainty will be chosen over possibility, that you will remain respectable rather than decisive. No one forced this contract on you. That is the most unsettling part. It was accepted gradually, silently, through habits you barely noticed forming. Procrastination is not about time management. It is an identity strategy. It allows you to postpone the moment you must discover whether you are capable of more. As long as the attempt is delayed, self-image remains intact. But something else happens beneath the surface. Faith weakens when it is not exercised. Fear grows when it is negotiated with. You begin to lower expectations, not consciously, but strategically. You stop demanding evidence from yourself. You accept explanation in place of results, and then something irreversible begins. Your mind stops responding to ambition as a command. It starts treating it as entertainment. You listen to powerful ideas. You feel inspired. You agree internally, and nothing changes. This is not coincidence. Autosuggestion works whether you guide it or not. The thoughts you repeat casually become instructions. The emotions you tolerate become standards. When you repeatedly tell yourself that progress takes time without defining action, you are not being patient. You are being trained. Trained to associate delay with safety. Trained to confuse preparation with movement. Trained to live in rehearsal. History does not remember those who prepared endlessly. Carnegie did not wait to feel certain. Ford did not ask permission from conditions. Lincoln did not delay conviction until approval arrived. They acted under incomplete information, but complete commitment. That distinction matters more than talent ever will. Right now, your life is being shaped by something subtle, not by your effort, not by your intelligence, but by what you have not yet decided. There is an enemy here. It does not shout. It does not threaten. It comforts. And until you recognize it clearly, it will continue making decisions in your name. There is a reason effort keeps failing you, and it has nothing to do with your work ethic. The enemy is not external pressure, not lack of opportunity, not even fear itself. The enemy is a condition of mind that convinces you effort is enough. Most people never meet the real enemy because it never announces itself. It hides behind respectable habits. It speaks in reasonable language. It rewards you just enough to keep you from rebelling. That enemy is drift. Drift is not inaction. Drift is action without command. You can be exhausted and still be drifting. You can be disciplined and still be Brit. You can even be successful, temporarily, and still be drifting. Drift occurs the moment you stop deciding and start reacting. Notice how subtly this happens. You respond to emails before you define purpose. You attend to urgency before direction. You allow circumstances to set the tone of your day. This feels mature, responsible, necessary. It is none of those things. It is surrender disguised as adaptability. The drifting mind avoids confrontation with itself. It prefers motion to decision. Because decision demands ownership. Ownership is frightening, not because of the work required, but because of the identity it threatens. Once you decide, there is no one left to blame. That is why fear rarely appears as panic. It appears as logic. Fear says, now is not the right time. Fear says, I need more information. Fear says, I'll start once things settle. Fear does not scream. It negotiates. And negotiation with fear always ends the same way. Tomorrow becomes next month. Next month becomes next year, and suddenly you are defending a life you never consciously chose. This is how faith is quietly replaced. Faith is not belief without evidence. Faith is decision without guarantee. When faith weakens, the mind defaults to safety, and safety has a cost no one calculates early enough. Safety trades long-term self-respect for short-term relief. You begin to measure success by avoidance rather than achievement. You feel proud for surviving instead of creating. And because nothing visibly collapses, you assume nothing is wrong, but something critical is eroding. Your ability to issue commands to your own mind. The mind is a servant by design, but it does not obey wishes. It obeys clarity. When clarity is absent, habit becomes ruler. This is why effort fails you. Effort applied by a drifting mind strengthens drift. It trains you to work hard without asking toward what. And the mind learns quickly. It learns that urgency belongs to others. That direction is optional. That comfort is reward enough. Soon the thought of decisive action produces discomfort. Not because it is impossible, but because it threatens the arrangement you have unconsciously built. This is the quietest form of fear, the fear of abandoning a familiar identity. Even an unsatisfying identity feels safer than an unknown one. So you compromise internally. You say you want more, but not at the cost of disruption. You say you seek independence, but only if it does not disturb stability. You say you value truth, but avoid the moment it demands action. This inner contradiction drains more energy than hard work ever could. And then comes the most deceptive stage. You begin to mistake information for transformation. You listen, you read, you agree. Agreement becomes the substitute for action. Your mind receives stimulation without instruction. And stimulation without instruction creates frustration. Frustration then reinforces fear. You start to believe that knowledge increases pressure rather than power. So you seek distraction again. This loop is not accidental. The mind prefers consistency over improvement, even if consistency means limitation. That is why most people defend their habits more fiercely than their potential. They have rehearsed those habits into identity, and identity resists change violently, but quietly. Understand this clearly. The world does not reward potential. It responds to definiteness. When you are definite, resistance rearranges itself. When you are vague, resistance multiplies. Henry Ford did not wait for consensus. Consensus forms after definiteness is demonstrated. The mind follows the same law. Once you issue a command, clear, non-negotiable resources appear. Energy consolidates. Fear retreats. But until that moment, fear remains in control, wearing the mask of prudence. Right now, there is something you have been postponing naming, not because you do not know it, but because once named, it demands allegiance. That is where pressure must increase, because without pressure, the enemy remains comfortable, and comfort is its greatest weapon. There comes a point when avoidance stops working, not dramatically, not publicly, internally. It happens when effort no longer produces reassurance, when routines feel hollow, when distraction loses its sweetness. This is the break point most people misunderstand. They believe something has gone wrong. They think motivation has vanished. They assume discipline is failing. None of that is true. What is failing is the illusion that you can delay decision without consequence. Up to this point, drift has been tolerable. You could explain it. You could justify it. You could call it patience, realism, responsibility. But now something has changed. The mind is no longer satisfied with explanations. It wants evidence, and evidence exposes a truth that cannot be negotiated with. You are not stuck because of limitation. You are stuck because of loyalty. Loyalty to an identity that kept you safe when you needed safety. Loyalty to patterns that once protected you from disappointment. Loyalty to a version of yourself that learned how to survive, but not how to command. This is where resistance intensifies, because the moment you recognize this, external blame collapses. You can no longer blame circumstances without feeling dishonest. You can no longer blame timing without sensing evasion. You can no longer blame others without knowing it is incomplete. That awareness is destabilizing. It removes the final refuge of the drifting mind. And so the mind resists one last time. It floods you with doubt. It asks, what if I commit and fail? What if I decide and lose? What if clarity exposes inadequacy? These questions feel practical. They are not. They are fear attempting to preserve control. Fear understands something you have not yet fully accepted. Once you decide, your inner hierarchy changes. The mind can no longer argue endlessly. Habit can no longer dominate direction. Excuses lose authority. Decision rearranges power internally. That is why procrastination intensifies just before breakthrough. Not because action is harder, but because delay is losing leverage. At the breakpoint, two identities collide. The identity built on repetition, and the identity demanded by purpose. Only one survives. This is why so few cross this threshold. They sense that something must be surrendered, but they do not yet see what replaces it. And uncertainty feels like loss. But look closely. What are you truly risking? Not comfort. You already lack peace. Not stability. You already feel imbalance. Not reputation. The most important audience has already grown restless. You are risking the familiar discomfort for an unfamiliar authority. That trade terrifies the drifting mind, because authority requires obedience to yourself. Once you give a command, the mind must follow, and that means no more casual promises, no more symbolic effort, no more hiding behind preparation. This is why most people prefer inspiration over instruction. Inspiration flatters the ego. Instruction disciplines it. And discipline threatens the last illusion of innocence. You can no longer say, I tried. You must say, I decided. That sentence changes everything. Decision is not intensity. It is finality. It does not ask how you feel today. It does not negotiate with mood. It does not wait for confidence. Confidence follows decision, not the other way around. This is the point where external pressure dissolves. You realize no one is holding you back. No system is conspiring against you. No gatekeeper is denying permission. There is only a command you have not yet issued, and issuing it will cost you something you have been protecting for years. The right to delay. Delay has been your shield. It allowed hope without accountability, ambition without exposure, desire without discipline. Once delay is removed, the mirror becomes unavoidable. You will see yourself clearly for the first time, not as potential, not as intention, but as direction in motion. This realization is heavy, because it means your future is no longer abstract. It is implied by what you choose next. That is why the mind hesitates here, not because it doubts success, but because it senses permanence. One decision changes everything, but only after you understand what must be abandoned first. Most people turn back at this point. They reinterpret clarity as pressure. They mistake responsibility for burden, and they return to drift older, smarter, and more restless than before. But some do not. Some remain still long enough to hear a quieter truth emerging beneath the fear. A truth that does not shout, that does not persuade. It waits, and when it is finally heard, fear no longer argues, it retreats, because something else has taken its place. Fear does not disappear when challenged. It disappears when replaced. This is where most teachings fail you. They tell you to fight fear, to overpower it, to eliminate it through effort. That approach misunderstands fear entirely. Fear is not a flaw, it is a placeholder. When faith is absent, fear occupies the space. When direction is unclear, fear assumes control. When the mind receives no command, fear improvises one. So the question is not how to destroy fear. The question is what must replace it. At this stage, something subtle but decisive occurs. You stop trying to feel ready. You stop trying to feel confident. You stop trying to feel certain. And instead, you begin to practice something far more dangerous. Mental discipline. Discipline is not force. It is agreement. An agreement you make with yourself before emotion is consulted. This is the birth of faith. Not faith as optimism, not faith as hope, faith as obedience to a chosen direction. Definiteness of purpose is not knowing every step. It is refusing to question the destination. Once the destination is fixed, the mind reorganizes itself automatically. Energy that was scattered becomes concentrated. Doubt that once lingered loses oxygen. Habits begin to realign without force. This feels unnatural at first, because for years your inner life has been governed by reaction. Now it is governed by instruction. Auto-suggestion begins to work differently. You are no longer repeating words to feel better. You are issuing commands to train behavior. The mind does not distinguish between casual repetition and deliberate instruction. It obeys both. That is why most people unknowingly program limitation. They repeat narratives of delay. They rehearse caution. They affirm uncertainty. And the mind complies faithfully. But now the pattern changes. You no longer tell yourself what you hope will happen. You tell yourself what will be done. Not loudly, not emotionally. Quietly, firmly, repeatedly. This is how faith is installed. Faith does not require emotion. It requires consistency. The mind begins to trust what you repeat without contradiction. And once trust forms, resistance weakens. Fear senses displacement. It attempts one final maneuver. It warns you of criticism, because fear of criticism is the guardian of conformity. It reminds you that decisive people are noticed, that deviation attracts attention, that independence invites judgment. This is where many retreat, not because they doubt their ability, but because they fear isolation. But observe history carefully. Every figure who altered their condition accepted temporary misunderstanding. Lincoln was doubted before he was trusted. Ford was ridiculed before he was followed. Edison was dismissed before he was inevitable. This is not coincidence. Definiteness always precedes validation. The moment you stop seeking approval, your inner authority solidifies. You no longer need agreement to proceed. You no longer measure progress by applause. You measure it by alignment. Alignment between thought, decision, and action. This alignment produces something rare. Quiet power, not excitement, not intensity. Control. You wake knowing what must be done. Not because you feel driven, but because you have decided. Emotion becomes irrelevant. And this is where transformation accelerates. The mind, once trained to drift, now expects command. When a challenge appears, it does not ask, "Is this possible?" It asks, "How do we proceed?" That question alone changes outcomes. Faith replaces fear not as belief, but as posture, a posture of authority. You stop negotiating with time. You stop bargaining with comfort. You stop explaining delay. You move, not urgently, not anxiously, decisively. This decisiveness creates momentum that does not rely on motivation. Motivation fades, discipline remains, and discipline, when rooted in purpose, becomes identity. This is the replacement few ever experience. Fear once controlled you because there was no alternative authority. Now there is. And once authority is established internally, external circumstances lose their intimidation. You no longer ask if you are capable. You assume responsibility and let capability reveal itself. This shift is quiet, almost invisible to others. But internally, something irreversible has occurred. You have crossed from reaction into command. And command changes how the world responds, not immediately, not theatrically, inevitably. Yet there is one final stage, rarely discussed, where this power settles, where it no longer feels new, where it no longer requires effort, where identity itself has changed. That stage determines whether this transformation lasts. At first, the change felt deliberate. You had to remind yourself, reinforce decisions, correct old reflexes. But now something else is happening. The effort to remain aligned is fading, not because discipline weakened, but because discipline is no longer required. This is the final transformation most never reach. When purpose stops feeling like an act of will and becomes a condition of being. Quiet power does not announce itself. It does not rush. It does not persuade. It settles. You notice it in the absence of internal noise. The endless debate that once drained you has gone silent. The constant weighing of options has disappeared. The need to justify yourself to yourself has dissolved. You no longer argue with your own decisions. That is the true marker of authority. When the mind stops resisting the direction you have chosen, it begins to serve it fully. This is not confidence. Confidence is emotional and fragile. This is certainty. Certainty does not need reinforcement. It does not need validation. It simply moves forward. Others may not notice at first. Your tone changes before your circumstances do. Your posture shifts before your results appear. Your patience deepens before rewards arrive. But those who pay attention sense it. They cannot name it. They just feel that you are no longer persuadable. You are no longer available for distraction. You do not explain your pace. You do not apologize for your direction. This is not arrogance. Arrogance seeks reaction. Quiet power ignores it. The world treats you differently now, not because you demand respect, but because indecision no longer leaks from your behavior. Indecision repels opportunity. Certainty attracts it. This is an old law, though rarely spoken. People trust those who trust their own direction. That trust opens doors logic cannot. This is how the mastermind principle activates naturally, not through networking, not through performance, but through resonance. Decisive minds recognize each other. They align without explanation. This is why certain conversations suddenly appear in your life. Why resources become available without pursuit. Why resistance weakens where it once felt immovable. It is not luck. It is alignment meeting alignment. At this stage, fear still exists, but it no longer commands. Fear becomes information, not instruction. You feel it, acknowledge it, and proceed anyway. This is the difference between bravery and maturity. Bravery fights fear. Maturity outgrows its authority. Your sense of time changes. You no longer panic about speed. You no longer romanticize urgency. You understand something most never grasp. Consistency under command outperforms intensity without direction. This understanding creates patience, not passive patience, but controlled patience. You are no longer in a hurry to prove anything. That urgency belonged to the old identity, the one that needed evidence to feel valid. Now action is sufficient, and because action is consistent, results compound quietly, not all at once, not dramatically, but permanently. This is why the results cannot be explained easily to others. They did not witness the internal shift, they only see the outcome. And outcomes without visible struggle confuse people. Some will attribute it to luck, others to timing, a few to talent. None of those explanations matter. You know what changed. You stopped drifting, you stopped negotiating with fear, you stopped delaying command, and in doing so you entered a condition few recognize and fewer sustain. Self-trust, not as belief, as structure. Your days now obey design rather than demand. Your energy flows toward purpose rather than reaction. Your mind operates as an ally rather than an adversary. This is quiet power. It does not shout for attention. It does not reveal itself prematurely. And it understands something deeply unsettling to those still drifting. The most powerful transformations happen when no one is watching, which is why they must be protected, not shared casually, not explained prematurely, not diluted by external noise. Because once named too early, power becomes performance, and performance weakens truth, so you move forward silently, not hiding, but not advertising. You allow results to speak only when they must, and in this silence something rare occurs. The world adjusts, because it always does, to those who no longer ask it for permission.